So, we are talking about now that we've had a chance to go through all of the human dynamics, or a lot of the most important to recreation management, human dynamics on site at your national park for this semester. We want to start transitioning now, like we started talking on Monday, into talking about sort of the outworking of those human dynamics, right? We've talked about things like use dynamics. What seasons of the year is your park popular? What times of day are specific sites within your national park as chosen for this semester? When are those busy? Is it a weekend park where folks are showing up for like a day, maybe a couple of days? Is it a week-long park? Are folks generally showing up to your park looking to stay a week or two at a time? Pretty different dynamics versus the weekend parks. Is it one of those like grand tour parks, one of the crown jewel parks maybe, where somebody is looking to stay for multiple weeks, even up to months, in terms of like a retirement scale visit to your park? Those dynamics are going to be pretty different versus a weekday park, a weekend park, and even most week-long parks. So Acadia National Park is generally a place where people stay about a week, 4 to 8 days kind of a thing. Yellowstone National Park is a park where people tend to stay at least that long, or potentially a reasonable amount longer, because there are a bunch of things going on in Yellowstone and in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and the Rockefeller Memorial Parkway, and Grand Teton National Park just to the south. So, what kind of use dynamics and what's driving those use dynamics? Like, what are the motivations of your visitors? Why are they coming? So we've talked about all these different cognitive factors. We've talked about specialization, experience, use, history, and all of this stuff. And we've seen how these different motivations can lead to various things along the lines of crowding and conflict. If people's motivations don't match each other, or even their very presence by crowding blocks somebody else's motivation for showing up, that crowding can lead to social impacts. And so now that we're kind of fast approaching the halfway mark of class, the semester, we want to now pivot forward into what are some of the physical resources of your park. And in particular, now that we understand visitor cognition a little bit better, how do your visitors absorb, experience, savor those resources, get a wonderful lifetime tier memory, a core memory out of the experiences and opportunities built out of the resources that your park enshrines and protects? So, we went through a pretty big kind of layer stack of different classes or types of resources. And now that we know how people want to move through your space, how they want to experience it, how they want to consume it, after a manner of speaking, how do your visitors not only experience all these different classes of resources or combinations of these resources, but also how do they affect the resources, right? So this is a management class. It's practical, it's applied, it's on the ground, empirical wisdom, as well as sort of conceptual textbook knowledge and research, case studies kind of stuff. So we got to bring it all together and kind of navigate through some of these, or a bunch of these different classes of resources and combinations of these resources, and see how do we protect them relative to how people want to use them and how people tend to impact them or even destroy them. So let's start at the bottom of the stack, and we want to kind of intro a whole bunch of classes of resources and go through the characteristics of the resource, the impact dynamics of that resource. How do mountains get impacted by visitors as a geologic resource and a topographic resource, versus how do vegetation resources and specific classes of vegetation like forest forbs, grassy or non-woody ground cover in your forest ecosystems, how are those impacted by visitors versus a mature tree that might be, if it's a coastal redwood or a giant sequoia, it might be 20 or 30 feet in diameter, and the trampling dynamics of a giant sequoia are quite different than they are for grass. So we want to get into, again, how do people experience these particular kinds of resources? So how can we provide them to people relative to their motivations and their cognitive processes? How do our visitors impact or change positively or negatively? We'll mostly focus on negatives because we'll definitely allow positive impacts to happen and continue. And then how do we manage that, right? So for each class of resource, we're going to talk about those three things. What are the dynamics of the resource? Why do people want to enjoy it? How do they enjoy it? How do they consume those experiences related to those resources? How do they impact it? And what do we do about that? How do we get out in front of some of these impacts that we know or we strongly suspect are coming? And how do we sort of mop up after impacts that we kind of either have to let happen to a small extent? How do we sort of heal up from that? Or how do we mitigate that? So how do we make those impacts less severe, less complicated, less exacerbated by the dynamics and timing and characteristics of the human use of these ecosystems? Okay. Just a quick note for administrative purposes before we get into all of those classes of resources: bedrock, soil, vegetation, water, wildlife, all that stuff. I jumped on the YouTube channel and uploaded a whole bunch of class recordings. So if you missed any class sessions earlier in the semester, if you go to the Park Management playlist on the class's YouTube channel, you can pick up any of those that were recorded. I'm still generating videos with subtitles out of the audio recordings, but all the screen recording ones are up and available to you. They start around, there's a whole bunch of them around the 100th video mark for 2024. All right, so watching those videos, not very exciting. We're just gonna put that out there. But in case you ever miss class and you need to fill in some holes in your understanding, that will be a useful resource for you. So head to the YouTube channel. You can just search for Logan Park or whatever on YouTube, and I'll come up under forestry. Cool. So we want to, from here, kind of introduce what is going on. So let's see. Plug this in right quick.